Hello, Freshman Theology. We're here in the final week of what's been a year. We are here at the end of your freshman year. After a whole year, for some of you, you've been with me in theology since August, and for others of you, you joined in January. But as we're here in what is our last week, I want to just take a few minutes through this video, which is the last one I'm putting together for all of you, to just talk through one more time the journey we've been on this year in this class, details of just kind of every step of the way that we've taken through everything we've learned, everything we've read, everything we studied, and trying to take all of it and put it all together and say, all right, well, then what do we do with all of this? So for starters, in what we have for you this week, it's watching through this video, and then once you're done, if you're wanting to have time to, as well as wanting an additional kind of boost to your grade, there's a reflection that I would love for you to do, in which you just kind of reflect on and type up nothing more than just one page on this class, what you feel like you've gotten out of it, things that have stuck out to you over the course of the year, and then takeaways you have from this class moving forward. So, freshman theology this year. Where have we been? What have we been doing? We've covered a lot. As we've walked through this class, we've covered each of the books between Genesis and Ruth in the Old Testament. We jumped into the Gospel of Mark in the New Testament. And overall, as we've gone through all these stories and as we've gone through all these lessons, things that I just want to make sure kind of stick with you from each of these. As we studied Genesis, remember, we were walking through these initial stories of how God is working within people, working within creation. And that even though from the very beginning, with our stories of Adam and Eve, things seem to break and fall apart and become distant, we see that what God is in the business of doing from the very beginning is trying to restore creation, redeem creation, and piece everything back together again. And that people are invited to be a part of this process, a part of this healing. We move to the book of Exodus, in which we saw a story of a people who were in a great need, people who felt alone and isolated, as we saw the Israelites enslaved in Egypt. And we saw a God that is willing to fight, willing to go to war, to break people out of the chains that they're experiencing. That when there's an enemy that seems too powerful for these people of God, that God's going to break them free. Through Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, we had books in which then God didn't just free the Israelites and then say, okay, good luck from here, but God walks through each step of kind of how they can put life together, how they can structure things, what life can look like away from Egypt and away from slavery, and instead in a life that's in the promised land, in which then things can be good. People can take care of each other. There can be kind of a love for neighbor. When we got to Joshua, we saw that even in times that are good, times that are joyful and celebration, such as the Israelites going into the promised land, that still sometimes then things don't always go according to plan, or things aren't always easy. Right? We had the Israelites right off the bat in the book of Joshua, upon entering the promised land, there's multiple other people groups there that are going to try to fight the Israelites and try to keep the Israelites from actually being able to settle. We see that God continues to guide and lead the Israelites during this time, that God continues to deliver. In Judges, once the Israelites settle in Canaan, in the promised land, we see that they still struggle with brokenness and unfaithfulness in what's a really discouraging cycle, that they continue to turn away from God in ways that are more and more severe over the course of the book. And yet, even in the midst of all of that unfaithfulness and all of that brokenness, again, God never abandons them. God always remains faithful. And why does God remain faithful? Because God is a God of covenant, as we've seen all the way back from Genesis, right? That God has committed to these people and said, I am going to be your God, and I'm going to provide for you throughout anything and everything. And so God is faithful, and God stays true to covenant. And that's too then what was so great about that last book that we've covered this semester, which is the book of Ruth, in which we saw a story of a very just normal, average person, right? She's not a judge. She has no like great, wonderful powers like the strength of Samson, right? If anything, she has things about her that the rest of the people around her would have looked down upon her for. And yet it is through this story of this person, Ruth, that we get a lesson in what human faithfulness and obedience and loyalty can look like. She has options to be able to choose an easy life for herself, but instead chooses one in which she is in more difficult circumstances to be able to take care of her mother-in-law, of Naomi, to be able to try to provide for someone who can't really provide for themselves. And this is the faithfulness, obedience, and loyalty that God calls the Israelites in the Old Testament to, a faithfulness in which they are providing for people and caring for people who can't necessarily provide for themselves, so that they're able to kind of keep taking care of each other and keep, again, restoring the needs of each other, much in the manner of what God is trying to do from Genesis on for humanity and creation as a whole, restoring, redeeming, taking care. When we got to Mark then, which we did a couple months ago, but when we learned about the story of Jesus, and who Jesus is in the time in which he lives, and then who we get to kind of learn about Jesus as far as who Jesus can be for us today. Remember that obedience and that loyalty and that faithfulness that Ruth shows, in which she's taking care of the people around her, providing for people's needs in a way in which she's being humble. This is what Jesus is all about. Jesus comes to earth as the Son of God to be the humble and faithful servant for us. And Jesus comes as a suffering servant, not to like conquer in ways in which the people of his time are expecting, right? But Jesus comes to die. Jesus comes to lay his life down, and his life is on that path from the moment that he's born. In reality, his life is on that path from the moment Adam and Eve first sinned. We saw all the way back in Genesis, God say to the serpent, someday there will be a descendant of woman who will undo what it is that you've done. What did the serpent do? The serpent pushed people away from God. And what does Jesus do? Through Jesus' death and resurrection, Jesus has reunited creation and people back to God so that God can fully redeem and restore people and creation. And so, yes, someday we are going to die. That is a reality. But just like Jesus didn't stay dead, we won't either. Because as Jesus lived again, so too will we. And that's the good news that's found in Jesus. That though we have brokenness and pain from time to time in our lives, and sometimes these times of brokenness and pain can be great and can be overwhelming, we know that no sin, no death, no power of Satan can ever stand up to the saving and life-giving power of Jesus Christ. We saw the Israelites face many obstacles in the Old Testament, and time again, we saw that God kept God's promises and God was faithful to them. Jesus is going to keep his promise, that his promise is that he loves you and that he cares for you and that there is a place for you in the arms of God. And Jesus is faithful. He's good. So I hope throughout some of the stories we've read and the books that we've covered this year, I hope things with that have stuck out to you and have stood out to you. I hope there's things from this class that will stick with you moving forward. But above all, I hope that you are able to see more clearly the love, grace, peace, and joy that is found in Jesus. And whether those are things that you feel like you see now, or whether you're learning about them now and maybe you'll see them later at some point in your life, I hope that you see them all the same. Because God loves you, God cares for you, and God is with you each and every single day. Thank you for a wonderful year. God bless you, and may Jesus be all the more evident in your life. And I'll see you guys in the fall. Blessings to you guys.